What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today we're doing the top 10 decks of Week 1 of Fusion Strike for the Sword and Shield through Fusion Strike standard format for the first full week of Fusion Strike being out on PTCGO. So we've already had a few tournaments happening on PlayLimitlessTCG.com, but there will be a lot more happening this week and the following week. And so today's video for Week 1 of the top 10 decks, this will be completely based on my own opinion on the Fusion Strike competitive metagame. But as there are more tournaments and more results, more decks and lists and players and everything, I will be incorporating more objective points to these top 10 decks videos. So probably for Week 3, we'll start doing it based on top 8 percentages and popularity and win percentages and stuff like that, and it'll become more objectively based than just being based on my opinion. But yeah, so today will be the top 10 decks based on what I've observed and tested and theorized. Before we get into it, shout out to PotownStore.com, the best place to get PTCGO codes, and be sure to use code CELIO for 5% off. Also check out CardTrooperGames.com for booster boxes and singles, and use code CELIO for 5% off, and PokemonCard.io. As soon as they get updated with Fusion Strike, which may be the day you're watching this video, I will have all of my Fusion Strike standard lists on there, but if you want some baseline lists, I do have all of my standard format deck lists from Evolving Skies from last format already up there. So let's get into the top 10 decks of Fusion Strike. Starting out at number 1 is going to be MuvMax. MuvMax coming out of Fusion Strike along with Genesect V, and all of the Fusion Strike support is very, very strong. And I went back and forth on if I wanted to make a new deck my best deck, my number 1 this week, and I think it is rightfully so the number 1 deck, because I think it is what everybody is taking into account, and I think it is what the metagame will form around and based off of. So MuvMax with Genesect V. Some people have tried it with Toxtricity, but that is more of the rogue version of this archetype. MuvMax Genesect V is going to be the core concept of the deck. MuvMax is great against the Urshifus because of Psychic. And also fighting resistance. It's going to be weak against Dark type attackers, though. Genesect V can attack. It's just a lot harder to attack with Genesect V, but I don't think this deck is unbeatable by any means, but I do think it's the number 1 deck right now. Number 2 is going to be Single Strike, combining Single Strike Urshifu VMAX and Single Strike Umbreon VMAX. The two can take care of a lot. Single Strike Urshifu VMAX can pretty much get up to the numbers to one-shot anything in the game, while Umbreon VMAX can gust up opposing Pokemon from the bench into the active spot, and also hit MuvMax for weakness, and also Dragapult VMAX and Shadow Rider VMAX. It one-shots a lot of important cards. And the deck is very, very aggressive. I don't have it as my number 1 because I do think it's less consistent than the MuvMax deck, at least for now, until the metagame really counters MuvMax more, with things like Path to the Peak being even more popular. But Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, a very great deck. And I also do want to say all of the decks on this list will be just very, very good and strong and competitive decks. None of them are really miles behind the others, in my opinion, but this is the ordering if I had to order them for the sake of making a top 10 list. Number 3 is going to be Suicune Ludicolo. Suicune Ludicolo can take down most VMAX decks and trade favorably with them, but it's hard to chain the attacks to do as much damage as you need to do. And I think Suicune Ludicolo is good because of the other good decks, being MuvMax and also Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon VMAX, having good matchups against most VMAX decks. It does struggle against some of the sniping and damage spread decks just because you have so much support out of single prize Pokemon and low HP single prize Pokemon at that on your bench. And a lot of times you will have to set up a new Suicune most turns, so that means you will be needing to use Melanie or Raihan on most of the pivotal turns of the game. The deck is very, very inherently strong, though. It can deal out maximum of 320 damage if your opponent has a full bench, and that is before adding damage counters with the Chilling Reign and Teleon. So a very inherently powerful deck, and not very far behind Mew and Single Strike Urshifu. It was really hard to decide which of these to put as number one, but since I felt like the metagame is centralizing around Mew, I thought it deserved to be number one, and then Single Strike is the best counter to Mew, so that's at number two, and then, of course, Suicune number three here. At number four, we have Dragapult VMAX. So Dragapult VMAX, a lot of people were saying was the best deck coming out of the Evolving Skies metagame and coming into the Fusion Strike metagame. It is still very, very good. You know, Fan of Waves plus Path to the Peak plus Marnie and maybe even Crushing Hammers or Yell Grunt. Those are all very strong and effective versus the Mew VMAX decks. But Dragapult VMAX is also going to take some collateral damage of there being more dark type attackers around due to Mew VMAX also having dark type weakness. So there's just more value in playing dark type attackers right now. But Dragapult VMAX is definitely still one of the very top decks. Really great at sniping down the Sobbles and Remoraid's and Houndours and stuff. Well, Houndours and stuff like that. It is good at sniping down Houndours, but unfortunately that is a bad matchup overall against the Single Strike decks. Yeah, I think it's just a little less inherently powerful than the decks right above it, Mew VMAX, Single Strike Urshifu, and Suicune. At number 5, we've got Rapidstrike Urshifu, specifically the Melanie variant, but I also don't despise any other variants of Rapidstrike Urshifu, so to say. Urshifu with Galarian Moltres I do consider a completely different variant, and it was on my considerations of decks for this top 10, but didn't quite make the top 10 this week. Urshifu Melanie got some great new cards in the new set. It got Basculin, and it also got the new Teleon VMAX Rapidstrike if you choose to play that in the deck. Even just playing the new Basculin is great, though. It can pretty much replace Vaporeon, because if you get a Rapid Flow onto something, then Basculin can just go ahead and clean it up for either a Raihan plus energy or just a Rapid Strike energy. Urshifu is definitely going down a bit of a notch because of the new Mew VMAX. So now not only is it worried about Dragapult, but it's also worried about Mew VMAX. Most of the things in the meta it is either good against or can handle. Definitely shaky versus Mew and Dragapult. The Galarian Moltres version, if it flows well, is going to be better against those bad matchups, whereas Urshifu Melanie is going to just flow better overall over the course of a tournament. So that's why this variant of Urshifu Rapidstrike is the one that I have up here at number 5, also because it gained some new cards that I do think are very good for it out of Fusion Strike. Number 6 is going to be Jolteon VMAX. So Jolteon VMAX's biggest fears are both of the Urshis, Single Strike Urshifu and Rapid Strike Urshifu. Without those, I do think Jolteon would have been the best deck out of the Evolving Skies metagame. And it's also very strong in the Fusion Strike metagame. Most of the decks that were very strong are still going to be very good. Fusion Strike doesn't really knock too many decks out. They might just go up or down a little bit, in my opinion at least. But Jolteon VMAX can hang with most of the decks. It has a good Suicune matchup, and I'm still unsure if I think its Mew matchup is favored, unfavored, or even. It's very, very winnable for both sides. I'm currently playing with Escape Rope in my Jolteon to get around the Latias, Fan of Waves to disrupt the Mew VMAX, and Path to the Peak, of course, to disrupt the Mew VMAX. I think this deck can beat most things. I have seen it beating Rapid Strike Urshifu and Single Strike Urshifu if the Urshifus falter a bit and or if the Jolteon player is just playing better. But yeah, I think it's a great deck that can take care of most of the top decks. Of course, having a problem against fighting weakness since your only attacker is Jolteon VMAX. Next is Leafeon VMAX. Now, Leafeon VMAX has been one of the only decks with a positive Single Strike Urshifu VMAX matchup. But the other matchups in the metagame aren't as convincing for Leafeon VMAX. VMAX is a bit of a worry for Leafeon since it does have free retreat, and Leafeon bases its damage for Grass Knot off of the opposing Pokemon's retreat cost. But I do think that Leafeon can combat Mew with just boss's orders to get up the Genesects and escape ropes to get around the Latias and Fan of Waves and things like that. So I don't think the Mew VMAX is a lost cause at all for Leafeon, but it's definitely not the matchup that you want to be hitting. It really wants to see the single strike decks, and then it can handle the other decks like Jolteon and Dragapult and Rapidstrike through running healing cards. It did gain Cook as an option in the new set, which heals 10 extra damage from Pokemon compared to Pokemon Center Lady. So Leafeon VMAX, a very smooth, consistent deck that does a lot of things above average, but nothing very, very great. So that's why this is going to be in the lower echelon of the top 10 tier list, but still a very strong meta archetype. At number 8, we've got Sylveon box or Rapidstrike box. This is seen with Blaziken VMAX added in, Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX. I've seen a little bit of the new Teleon VMAX in it, typically using the Octillery for support, sometimes Leafeon V to accelerate energy, sometimes Galarian Moltres as a backup attacker and to accelerate energy. This deck is very versatile. It typically has outs to many matchups, but that also makes it a little less consistent, but still a very strong deck, and very strong because of its toolbox approach where it can handle many matchups. Even though it's just one deck, it has so many different types of attackers. It is special energy reliant. It doesn't have the Teleon engine like a lot of our other top decks do, so it doesn't have that consistency of just searching for what you need, but it does have Rapid Strike search to just search out your Rapid Strike energy. So Sylveon's definitely a top deck, and very versatile. If you like playing a deck that can handle most things and you can tech it out the way you want, that's the kind of deck that Sylveon VMAX is. At number 9, we have the new Rapidstrike and Teleon VMAX deck, which focuses on just dealing a moderate 140 damage to the active, returning energy, and then Cheryl next turn, and rinse and repeat. There are 2 variants of the list. One plays basic water energy and training court, and the other plays no basic energy, just focusing on the attack and Cheryl, and that list will typically be playing Path to the Peak, since it doesn't care about its own ability. I think this deck is definitely good, competitive, solid. It functions. It can beat a lot of meta decks. It can also lose to a lot of meta decks. I don't have a great concrete opinion on where Rapidstrike and Teleon VMAX is falling in our current meta, but did I say Teleon or Urshifu? I meant to say Rapidstrike and Teleon VMAX is falling in our current metagame. I do know it's good, though. I know it's solid, but I'm not sure if I would put it up into those tier 5 spots because I'm not confident it's better than the decks that it is under. So I do have it at the 9 spot because it is a good deck. I'm just not sure how much higher it can go because it does have its faults where it relies on getting Cheryl, and it relies on special energy, which can be walled out sometimes. And also, it just does not do a lot of damage. Like, Single Strike Urshifu VMAX is a deck that can just plow through anything. Mew VMAX can just plow through anything. Then when we get to these, the decks that are a little lower on my list, like Leafeon and Inteleon, they do a little less damage and they're a little less inherently powerful, and they rely on beating certain types of decks, or they rely on what your opponent is doing sometimes. And that's why I have Inteleon down here, but I still think it's a good deck. And number 10 is a little kind of my wild card pick here, Galarian Weezing variants. Number 10 was going to be a dark focused deck. It was between this or Gengar VMAX, Umbreon VMAX, Single Strike, or even Eternatus was an option in my head, or Galarian Moltres in Rapidstrike Urshifu. Just because Dark does have a lot of potential right now, with Mew VMAX being the best deck and Dragapult VMAX still being in there, and Dark just having a lot of options. But Galarian Weezing offers something that the other decks don't, that none of the other decks offer, which is ability lock all the time, not just in a stadium, and it forces your opponent to have rope or boss, or they're just not using abilities that turn. It's also a good single prize Pokemon that forces your opponent to knock it out while you're getting damage in. And it's also very efficient for just using one energy, and it has a lot of great backup attackers. It has Sableye V, it has Galarian Moltres V, and it has the new Hoopa V from Fusion Strike, which can be either Dark or Psychic. So this is a deck that I do think is a little underrated by the community, but it is very good, and it has, it's the only deck that can ability lock like that, and it has so many different answers it can come back from, between Galarian Moltres' Energy Acceleration and Raihan. And there's also multiple ways to build it. John Mustoe got top 8 in the Full Grip Games tournament with a variant of it using Hammers and Galar Mine and no Teleon engine and Crobat VMAX. So Galarian Weezing variants, mostly the Galarian Weezing with Sableye V and the Inteleon engine. I do think they are a good competitive deck. So, and I think we should be seeing a lot more of them. And if we don't, they just continue to go under the radar and picking up some placements. So that is my top 10 list for this week. Of course, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll be making these weekly. Like I said at the start, these are just going to be my opinions since we don't have a lot of tournament results to go off of for the Fusion Strike metagame yet, but either next week or the week after, I will start working in the win percentages or the top 8 percentages or some sort of point system for the power rankings of these decks. So be sure to subscribe to the channel for daily Pokemon TCG content. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.